Hi guys, welcome back. As you can see on your screen, I've got a VEX test bed in front of us. We'll be doing some example problems or programming examples using the VEX test bed coming up in class in the next week or so. So I would like to go over just the basic parts of the VEX test bed, how to set it up, how to use each of the sensors, and so on, just to get you some background knowledge on it before you start programming with it. So first, as you can see here in the middle, we have this large piece that says VEX across the top. This is our cortex. Essentially, the cortex is the brain of the robot. This is what's going to take the program or code that you have written, and it's going to decipher it into a task that the robot can follow. And it's going to allow the robot to perform that task. So the first thing we need to do whenever we're using one of these VEX cortexes is make sure that we supply it some power, which is going to go right here. We have an on-off switch right over here, and to supply these with power we're going to use a VEX battery pack. Essentially this is just about 6 AA batteries that are rechargeable that we can use to power our cortex. It has obviously a wire and a port on the other side. The port just gets plugged in right there in the power section. We want to make sure we keep our cortex turned off at all times unless we are running a program. So when you're writing program or code on Robot C, make sure that it's turned in the off position or it is not connected. It needs to have one of those two. Next, we need to make sure that you can transfer your Robot C program to the cortex so that it has a code to read. We're going to do that using just a simple USB cord. One end of this USB cord will be plugged into your computer, and the other end of the USB cord gets plugged directly into the top of the cortex. So we'll plug it in, and you'll notice that it lights up. It's now being somewhat powered by the computer, but not enough to run a program. I still have my off switch in the off position. So now we can start talking about sort of the nuts and bolts of the VEX cortex. We'll start over here on the left-hand side with our sensors. Okay, so we obviously have 4 sensors on our test bed, and they're different. 2 of the sensors are analog sensors, and 2 of them are digital sensors. And I'll explain what that means as I explain each sensor. So first, over here on the far left, we have the potentiometer. The potentiometer has a shaft that goes through the middle of it, and that shaft, basically, the potentiometer just reads how much that shaft turns, how many degrees it turns. So I can turn it to the left, and I can turn it to the right. Now, the cortex is able to read those turns, or the amount of those turns, in a value from 0 to 4095, and that's why it's an analog sensors. Analog sensors read large values. So if I wanted to program my motors to turn on once the potentiometer reaches a value of 2000, I could do that, and once the potentiometer turns and reaches a value of 2000, the motor would then turn on. Let's go all the way over to the far right-hand side where I have my light sensor. So this is actually known as a line follower, but essentially it measures the amount of light that comes into this sensor at the top, and it measures that in a value from 0 to 4095. So if I were to put my hand over top of the line follower, obviously no light would be getting to it, so it would read a value of 0. If I had a really, really bright light in front of it, it would read a value of 4095. Again, I can write a program that could start the motors once the line tracker reads a value of 2000. Then the motors would start. Next, we have our other 2 switches, and here we have a bump switch and a limit switch. Both of these you can think of as having an on or an off. An on or an off. When we are just in the regular position, it's reading as a 0, which would be an off, and when we press it in, the cortex reads it as a 1, which would be an on or pressed in. Again, when we go back to the other one here, the limit switch, we have a 0, which is off, and a 1, which is on. So those are our 4 sensors that we'll be using. Each of these sensors, you'll write a program that incorporates one or more of the sensors as sort of just practice for programming. The last piece of our VEX test bed here is obviously located along the top. We have 2 VEX 9 393 motors along with 2 wheels, and those will be incorporated in the testing of our programming skills. So hopefully this video was helpful to you in terms of getting to know the VEX testbed, and you may want to refer back to it as you write your example programs for your different switches and sensors. If you have any questions, you can feel free to ask me in class. See you soon.